Hello, this is Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high-quality racing oil for your two-stroke or four, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support. Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazer, and what this video is going to cover is a look back at Honda's all-new CR125 for 1998. This is the first year when they went to the alloy frame. I had the very similar 1999 model. I was really excited to get this thing. I remember my buddy Eric had got the 97 CR250 brand new, and I was so jealous of him when he had that thing. I thought it was so cool. I had the 96 CR250, and it turned out, after riding it, I think the 96 was actually a much better bike in most respects. The thing did look cool, though. It definitely had it all over in terms of appearance. In terms of performance, I'm not so sure that at least this first generation was a huge success on the track. The CR125, though, I had a lot of anticipation for it. I thought that the bike looked great. I originally had actually wanted to get the YZ125, but if you remember back then, the YZ125 was the hottest machine around. And when I went to go buy one, I couldn't find any. Everybody was sold out of the damn thing. So I said, I'll get the Honda. I'd had several CR125s. I'd had a 1990, an 87, and I really loved them. The bikes were great. They were really fun to ride, very fast at the time. But this 99 that I had, it was really not that. It was very slow. Power band was very narrow. And the 98 really is kind of the same machine. They really didn't do much to fix that. I think it was just inherent in, I don't know whether it was the cylinder or the airbox was the problem. They had some issue when they transitioned to this aluminum frame. It really neutered the power. The bike went from a mid to top screamer that just pulled and pulled and pulled to this bike that had like a big burst in the middle and then nothing. I remember it felt like when I rode my buddy's YZ125, his 99, it felt like a 175 compared to this 125. And it really was a huge difference. I mean, again, modern bikes, I think there's more parity now than there was back in the day where you could get a really bad bike and a really good bike. And Yamaha just was killing it in terms of the power bands in this era. And the Honda, like I said, while it looked great, and it actually handled, I didn't have a problem with the handling. I know a lot of people thought it didn't handle that great. I didn't really have a problem with that either. I thought it handled decently enough. Most 125s, when it comes down to it, I think they're all pretty decent handlers. The bikes are so light and you kind of toss them around. But the motor was just, I had trouble. I was always messing with the gearing, trying to get it to run right. The power band was just so narrow. Either you're bogging, or if you gear it down, then it feels like it runs out like right away, and you're always between gears. And they went to the 5-speed transfer. They had a lot going on in this era, and I think this bike, by most people's estimation, would be considered maybe one of Honda's biggest disappointments. A lot of people had such high hopes for these first generation alloy bikes, and they were kind of a flop in terms of their performance. Although they sold a ton of them, obviously, Honda had a great reputation at the time for winning, and I think that certainly sold them a lot of motorcycles. But I think the performance was maybe a little lacking in this first generation machine. It really didn't get things sorted out until 2000 when they came out with the second generation bikes, when they started to get the chassis a little bit better and stuff. I don't think Honda ever really got the power bands situation straightened out. This HPP motor, which had come out in 1990, really 97 is kind of like the last year where it's really a competitive motor. They kept changing it. They made some changes in the early 2000s, but it never really got back to where it was before this. So in terms of motor performance, the earlier Hondas, your 1990 CRs actually probably blow the doors off this 98, which is pretty shocking when you think about it. If you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other videos I've done. I've done retrospectives of all kinds of other 125s, 250s, 500s, off-road machines, basically even ATV stuff. And if you'd like to look at the history of motorcycles and ATVs, you can find a lot of this other stuff on my channel. If you'd like to support what I do here at the Motocross Vault, I have Motocross Vault merch available at my Teespring store. I just came out with an all-new design based on maybe one of the most iconic machines of all time, the Kawasaki KX60. I did it based on a 97 KX60, as I kind of like the design of the logo that year with the little checkered flag with the KX logo on the tank. It's a good looking machine, definitely an iconic machine. But I have Kawasaki, Husqvarna, Honda, Suzuki, all kinds of other brands based in my merch store. And if you like something custom, let me know. I'm happy to do something with your number on the back of the jersey or a shirt or whatever else. Just let me know. Just send me a DM and I'll be happy to work up something custom for you. So here, without further ado, is a look back at Honda's all new for 1998 CR125R. In 1997, Honda set the motocross world abuzz with the introduction of the industry's first aluminum-framed production motocross machine. The all-new 1997 CR250R debuted to mountains of excitement and glowing reviews. Magazine editors raved about its spacey looks and blistering motor performance, and racers snapped up the alloy-framed wonders in droves. Hype, sexy styling, and Honda's impeccable racing reputation all contributed to deliver Big Red a massive showroom hit in 1997. While the new CR250R was a big hit in terms of sales, it turned out to have a more mixed reception on the track. Fears in Japan over potential failures led to an overbuilt frame that hindered the CR's handling and comfort. Excessive vibration, mediocre steering and precision, and an overly harsh feel were all hallmarks of this first-generation alloy frame. The CR250R continued its reputation for impeccable motor performance, but its handling and comfort both took major steps backward in the transition to the all-new design. While the all-new CR250R was garnering mountains of press in 1997, its little brother soldiered on largely unchanged aside from some minor motor tweaks and a fork upgrade. All new in 1993, the CR125R's platform was beloved for its sharp handling and blistering top-end performance. Its Honda PowerPort motor revved harder and higher than anything else in the class, and the CR was recognized as the top choice for fast kids and aspiring national pros. While the CR125 was without peer at the upper end of the RPM range, its 125cc power plant was not always the top choice for riders of every skill level. Low-end torque was virtually non-existent, and the bike demanded skill and commitment to keep it in the meat of its power band. The little Honda suspension was also less refined than its rivals, with machines like Suzuki's RM125 often besting it in shootouts due to its more flexible motor characteristics and superior suspension performance. In 1997, it was Yamaha's deep blue YZ125 that conquered the 125 class with an incredibly broad and brawny power band. After a decade of mediocre YZs, the Blue Crew came out swinging in the mid-90s with a string of powerhouse 125s. The 1997 YZ felt like a 175 compared to its rivals, and every magazine praised its potent power and excellent do-it-all chassis. While the 97 YZ was a unanimous choice as the top 125 in the land, the CR125 still had a loyal following among those with the skill to put its peaky power band to good use. The little Honda still had the longest top-end pull, strongest brakes, best clutch, smoothest shifting, and most bulletproof motor. Its chassis lacked the curb appeal of its sexy alloy brother, but it was a decent handler with suspension that was raceable and an impeccable reputation for quality and reliability. Pros still loved its potent power, and most other riders felt it was the second best 125 available in 1997. After a season of minor upgrades in 1997, it was time for a complete revamp of the CR125 platform in 1998. First up, and most notable, was the retirement of the old machine's proven steel frame in favor of an all-new aluminum design. Similar in layout to the 97 CR250R chassis, the new frame was crafted out of Series 7000 aluminum and featured two large spars arrayed in a perimeter fashion as its main structural backbone. The 98 CR250R and CR125R frames looked very similar, but the 125's chassis featured thinner wall construction, unique geometry, and a smaller engine cradle that ran closer to the engine cases. A new welding process, reshaped down tubes, and thinner wall construction addressed some of the alloy chassis complaints from the 97 design by reducing rigidity by a full 15% when compared to the 97 CR250R chassis. When compared to the 97 CR125R steel frame, the new aluminum design was 50% more rigid and featured a steeper geometry for improved turning. Both the 98 CR250 and all-new 125 shared the same bodywork, handlebars, gas tank, alloy subframe, rear suspension linkage, swing arm, and rear axle for 1998. Braking performance was improved for the new year with the addition of a larger 240mm rotor for the rear and a redesigned brake pedal designed to reduce flex under use. On the suspension front, the CR125R received an all-new fork and shock combination for 1998. Up front, the CR employed an updated version of the 46mm Kayaba forks employed in 1997. The new forks featured revised damping and a redesigned bottoming system with small rubber bumpers at the top to reduce harshness and hydraulic lock under full travel. In the rear, the Honda received an all-new Kayaba shock designed to pair with its redesigned linkage, which featured a flatter ratio for 1998. The new damper offered 12.7 inches of rear-wheel travel with separate external adjustments for high and low speed compression as well as rebound damping adjustment. On the motor front, the CR continued to employ the same basic Honda PowerPort variable exhaust valve system it had used since 1990. In 1992, the CR250R had retired the original HPP design and moved on to a more advanced system that both varied exhaust port shape and altered exhaust volume to provide the best combination of broad power and high RPM performance. Pioneered by Kawasaki with their KIP system, this combination of features was found to deliver the best overall performance in a two-stroke machine. While the HPP design delivered blistering top-end performance, it had never been able to replicate the snappy low-end response of many of its 125 competitors. In 1998, Honda looked to boost the motor's flexibility by making several changes to both the bottom and top end of the motor. A new cylinder was spec'd with all new porting and a reshaped exhaust valve. Both the transfer and exhaust ports were massaged, with new guides added to the exhaust valve for more precise operation. The reed valve received a new stopper, and the ignition was revamped to produce double the output of 1997. An all-new airbox was added to work with the redesigned frame, and a new single radiator replaced the old dual units of 1997. The new radiator carried 18% more fluid and was claimed to be 22% more efficient in Honda's testing. Mixing duties continued to be handled by Kaheen's proven 36mm flat-slide PJ carburetor. Interestingly, the 125 carburetor did not receive the CR250R's power jet for 1998. In the bottom end, Honda made significant changes by dropping the 6th gear and moving to a 5-speed gearbox for 1998. The new transmission featured wider and stronger gears and all new ratios designed to complement the revised motor's power characteristics. Honda claimed the new arrangement was both lighter and stronger than the old 6-speed design. The clutch mechanism remained unchanged, but a new stainless steel cable was added to provide smoother operation. On the track, the all-new CR125R offered a completely different riding experience than previous Honda 125s. The new frame and layout gave the machine a larger 250 feel that some riders liked and others did not. The new twin-spar frame was very wide through the middle, with a tall, hard, and flat seat that imparted a sit-on rather than sit-in feel that was common in the previous CR125R. Despite the 15% reduction in rigidity, the alloy frame continued to feel very harsh and unforgiving. Vibration from the motor and feedback from the suspension made it directly back to the rider, both contributing to premature rider fatigue. As it had with the CR250, the new alloy chassis seemed to neuter some of the previous machine's handling precision. Despite its steeper geometry, the new chassis exhibited a front-end push that was previously unheard of on a Honda 125. The front end never felt fully planted, and the machine seemed to skate above the track instead of biting into it. If there was a berm or something to push against, it turned well enough, but if the track was hard and flat, the bike took more effort than its rivals to hug the inside line. High-speed action remained a white-knuckle affair, with epically unnerving headshake manifesting itself under deceleration. With its large feel, the CR was less nimble in the air than machines like the RM125, but it jumped straight and generally went where it was pointed. In large whoops, the chassis stiffness could be felt, and the machine was rock solid in stadium rockers. Most average riders did not seem to feel the need for this level of rigidity, but pros did appreciate the ultra-stiff character when pushing the machine's limits. The other half of the CR's handling equation for 1998 was the performance of its new suspension. Here, the frame once again played a major part in transmitting a great deal of feedback to the rider. Fork performance was improved, but the CR continued to trail most of its rivals in comfort. The nearly identical Kialba bumper forks found in the 1998 YZ125 delivered a much plusher ride, and some of this was probably due to the harsh feel of the frame. Overall, the damping was lightened for 1998, with settings that were designed to provide more linear performance, but the forks continued to exhibit a harsh spike in the midstroke. The bottoming feel was improved with the new elastomer bumpers, but the forks were felt to be too prone to bottoming by many. Faster and heavier riders were likely to need heavier springs and maybe a revalve, but the forks could be raced in stock condition with a little fine-tuning by most riders. In the rear, the new shock was even less loved, with a harsh feel that was overly exacerbated by the CR's hard and thin seat. Square-edge bumps and sharp ledges were transmitted directly to the rider's kidneys with a dull thump that rattled teeth and bruised backsides. As on the CR250, the new alloy frame and linkage imparted a dead feel to the rear suspension that seemed to cause the machine to pound into bumps that other machines floated over. This worked well in big whoops, where the CR could be trusted to hammer through without doing anything unexpected, but the bike was harsh nearly everywhere else. Big jumps were not a problem, but rear comfort was well below what most non-pros considered acceptable. If you were a hard charger, the shock worked well, but for everyone else, there were far better performers available in 1998. Of all the changes made in 1998 to the CR125, by far the most surprising was the performance of its new motor. For over a decade, the CR125 was the king of the high RPM screamers, and that string finally ended in 1998. Considering the modest nature of the motor changes made for this year, this was quite a shock to many. Anyone who had ridden the new alloy frame CR250R in 1997 was not surprised by the handling and suspension compromises the new chassis demanded, but no one in their wildest dreams had predicted the new CR125 would be slow. The 250 had remained a rocket in its transition to aluminum, but something went wrong when they shoehorned that smaller motor into the new chassis. At the time, many people speculated that new airbox and air boot were the culprit, but many tuners would later blame the new cylinder for much of the CR125's newfound power woes. Regardless of the root cause, however, the new cylinder, airbox, reeds, and ignition combined to produce a power plant that was a mere shadow of its former self. On the track, the revamped motor was incredibly difficult to ride with a one-dimensional power curve that came on late and signed off early. Low-end torque was virtually non-existent, and the bike was a bottomless pit of bog below the mid-range. Once on the pipe, the Honda did snap to attention and pumped out a strong blast of power that rocketed the bike forward. Unfortunately, however, this blast ended just as fast as it had started, and the bike refused to pull past the mid-range. Just as the old bike was getting started, this new version decided to throw in the towel. For most riders accustomed to 11 years of Honda Screamers, this new power profile was something of a shock. The revamped power band was closer in feel to an early 90s Yamaha, and utterly unlike anything Honda had produced since the early 1980s. Early magazine testers thought there had to be something wrong with their test bikes, but the CR's power turned out to be a bit more difficult to recapture. Throwing on a pipe, rejetting the carb, and opening up the airbox helped a bit, but the new motor refused to run anything like the power plants of old. This new power band exasperated novices with its peaky nature and frustrated pros with its lack of top-end pull. If ridden correctly, its mid-range motor was decently fast, but it was hard to keep it from bogging out of turns or running flat if it was revved too far. Jetting continued to be a point of frustration as well, with the Honda proving very sensitive to temperature and humidity changes. Also adding to the motor's frustrating nature was its all-new 5-speed transmission, which seemed to be geared for the low-end torque that never materialized. With the stock final drive in place, the bike often felt between gears, and even skilled riders had a difficult time keeping the bike on the bubble. Most riders felt adding a tooth to the rear and mercilessly abusing the clutch were the best ways to get the most out of its narrow power curve. While the clutch was largely up to this abuse, the new transmission proved less so, with some riders experiencing unintended shifts under power. This propensity to pop into the next gear under power was unheard of on a Honda and traced to issues with the shift drum and detent mechanism. Thankfully, this issue did not seem to be widespread, and the bike did never pop into false neutrals. On the detailing front, the all-new CR125 was a work of art in many areas and a bit head-scratching in others. All the materials, from the high-quality bolts to the forged levers to the comfortable and durable grips, were top-notch. The brakes offered fantastic power and feel and never seemed to require bleeding. The steel bars were well-shaped, durable, and less prone to bending than most of its competition. All the plastic looked great, fit perfectly, and took abuse well. The alloy frame was incredibly trick with its beautiful welds and exotic looks, and it stayed looking new far longer than its painted competition. In terms of durability, the new frame was also quite robust, with failures being no more common than the steel units it replaced. While the frame looked cool, its design did make access to some things more difficult. The ignition cover was also made of a flimsy plastic that was easily warped or damaged. If you tightened the screws too tightly, it deformed and would let mud and water where it did not belong. Replacing this with an aftermarket unit was cheap insurance against a costly repair down the line. Vibration was a constant annoyance, as the alloy frame seemed to channel all of it right to the rider's hands. Switching to a rubber-mounted clamp and an aluminum bar did help, but the tingle never fully went away. The rest of the motor, while not particularly powerful, was at least reliable. Top-end life was good, and the bike took abuse well as long as you cleaned the air filter regularly, used good quality oil, and stayed on top of that Honda PowerPort maintenance. If you did neglect the valves, the HPP could become sticky and further add to your horsepower woes. Servicing them continued to be a real pain in the kidney belt, and no one much cared for their complicated design. With its narrow power band, clutch abuse was a must, and this tended to foul the transmission fluid with aluminum from the drive plates rather quickly. Changing this fluid regularly was a must if you wanted to keep the clutch and transmission healthy. While the ghost shifting was an annoyance for those who experienced it, the problem did not seem to hinder reliability. No one reported the type of blown gear sets that had plagued the Yamaha YZ the year before. In the end, the 1998 CR125R turned out to be one of the most surprising disappointments of the decade. The mixed reaction its bigger brother received in 1997 certainly tamped down some of the enthusiasm around its switch to aluminum, but no Honda fan in their wildest dreams would have predicted the new bike would be slow. Overly stiff and poorly suspended? Sure, but slow? No way. This revelation was a shock to those who had come to expect a certain type of 125 performance from Big Red. Beautifully built and artfully styled, the 1998 CR125R was a machine with a ton of sex appeal but little substance. Stiff, slow, and outclassed by its rivals, the CR's days as king of the 125 Rev Rangers had finally come to an end. So there you have it. That's a look back at the all-new 1998 CR125, a machine that I think is easily one of the best looking machines of the 1990s. I still love the looks of this bike. It's a great looking machine. I love this actually even better than my 99. I like the graphics this year. It's a really good looking bike. It just didn't have the motor to go with it. I think, again, probably one of the most disappointing machines Honda's ever built in terms of how much anticipation probably had for the performance of the all-new machine. Many things just didn't add up that year to get the kind of winner that people were looking for. And really, as I said, this is kind of like the end of the run for Honda CR125s being really competitive at the front kind of bikes. I think, obviously, you could still win on the machine. Lamson actually won a race this year, but I think you had to do a lot of work. And later bikes, I think they ended up going back to like a 95 cylinder to try and get some of the power back. But whatever, for whatever reason, whatever went wrong this year, it just didn't come together for Honda. And the CR125, unfortunately, its best days were in the past at this point. If you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other videos I've done. If you have a video you'd like me to do in the future, feel free to leave a comment in the section below. And if you can support me with my merch at the Motocross Vault, my Teespring store, there'll be a link in the description below. And I would certainly appreciate the help in that regard. And until we meet again, this is Tony Blazer from the Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down.